Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's class live, our Zoom session. It's just about 8:30, 8:28, so I'm going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. And let's see who might be joining us. If not, and you are watching this, that means you're watching it on the recording, and I will, of course, have placed it on YouTube so that you can review it. So, happy Wednesday. It is week 5. It is August 23rd, 2017, August 23rd. And I am coming to you from beautiful Lake Park, Florida, which is near North Palm Beach, Florida. So, once again, welcome. And we're going to go ahead and get started in just a moment. I don't see anyone else here but me for now. So, this week, once again, I think we take on a very fascinating couple of subjects, actually, through social psychology or just in general. We could talk about politics, society, civility, organizations, but we're going to discuss a little bit tonight what we're studying this week, which is prejudice and human aggression. Hopefully you had the chance to catch up with the reading and keep up with the reading, as well as to watch the videos that are in the course room in the Explore tab. I'm sure that you're watching, going in there every week and looking at those. This course in particular, I know some courses don't have the opportunity, don't have as many videos that they could share. It's not necessarily a video-rich content in the other courses, but this course, social psychology, certainly does have a great number of very good videos that help accentuate and explain what we're discussing here in social psychology. So make a little bit of an adjustment there to try and get some light on my face and make for my big close-up in the movies here. Anyway, so Albert Bandura is a psychologist, kind of a counselor kind of guy. He's one of the people who came up with social learning. He came up with social learning, which he's still alive, by the way. He's 91 years old and pretty much became famous through the lens of counseling psychology and education psychology. He's the one that came up with the Bobo doll, and you may recall from this course or other courses how he would have children watch through a window people being aggressive with a toy doll. They were very popular when I was a kid. They were very heavy on the bottom. He'd blow them up, and they'd be like a picture or like a kind of a blow-up doll of it could be Batman, or it could be a clown, or it could be Fred Flintstone for that matter, whatever. And it would stand, 3 or 4 feet high, about, as high as a young child, and you could actually punch it and it would come back because there was a heavy bottom with all that sand. Anyway, so Bandura had some kids watch that, and then took them to another room, and bottom line is they became aggressive. Those who had seen people acting aggressive with the doll were more apt to be aggressive when they got frustrated with a situation, compared to other children who saw the doll but saw people playing sort of quote unquote nicely with the doll. They were less likely, statistically less likely, to become aggressive when they were placed in another situation. So that evolved into what we call social learning theory. It's a psychological term, but also it lends itself to social psychology. His experiments and his research and his writing and all the things he did lends itself to social psychology as well, because we look at that and we can see how when kids are exposed, and adults for that matter, but especially kids, because that's when the brain is really kind of still forming and still plastic, what we call has plasticity. Anyway, a lot of research is done with that. and with adults too at this point. But we know that exposure to aggression tends to lead to more aggression from kids. That's not to say that every child who has been exposed to violence or aggression will, express that or grow up to be a violent and aggressive person. Not in every case, because there are other factors as well, but there's a greater propensity for that to happen. So, we can then generalize this to a child, and some of you have alluded to this. Not many people have posted yet, but some of you have already alluded to this. If a child grows up in an aggressive home where he or she witnesses domestic violence, person to person, from their mother and father, perhaps, they tend to act more aggressively. And I see this because I work with kids a lot, and I see how some of the kids, behave. And then when I meet the parents and just you can see how they talk to each other, you can just kind of tell that they at least don't talk to each other nicely in their home. If they're willing to be verbally aggressive and verbally violent, for that matter, in the presence of other people in society, then you can only imagine when they're behind closed doors what that might be like. So you sometimes will see a child acting aggressively, and you kind of understand that that's because they're normal. That's how they have learned to resolve conflicts. That's how they have learned to get their way. That's, those kinds of things. So then when you look at, society in general, whether it's the Bobo doll through the glass, or the movies and the television shows that we all watch, kids especially, the video games are really, I'm going to say, problematic. I'm not going to apologize for that. I've not done the research, but the research speaks for itself that kids who watch some of the video games tend to be more aggressive. And the bigger problem is the video games keep getting more and more aggressive and more violent, and it becomes more and more accepted, even implying, I guess, from what I understand at least, inappropriate sexual activity. So kids kind of get the idea, the wrong idea, I should say, of what that's all about. Grand Theft Auto comes to mind. You may be familiar that with some of the sort of, scenes, for lack of a better term, that happen there. So one of the students had posted that there should be more government regulation. And while I have a certain opinion about this, you can probably tell, and I try and, be as objective as I can, and I am being objective, I believe. I'm not for the pornography. I'm not for the violent video games or the extremely violent movies. But I don't know that government regulation is going to solve our problem. Here's what I say to that, because I talk about this in workshops and seminars pretty often, because I do a lot of parenting workshops. So while not to disparage government regulation, like, step one is having the parents be involved and parent their children with intentionality. So, if that was all happening, everything what parents were trying, but they just couldn't stop their children from watching these videos, then okay, government definitely needs to step in. But the fact of the matter is, when we have so many kids exposed to these inappropriate videos, the parents just simply aren't doing their job. That's just the way it is. So, and I've seen it, like I said, with kids. I've seen them, adults too, for that matter. After seeing certain movies, they come out with a different kind of attitude. I've done unofficial experiments where I simply watch people, and I watch people all the time, right, coming out of certain movies, and I see, especially with kids, teenagers, because their emotions are really high and their hormones are really high and kind of out of control, people say. But if they come out of a adventure movie, they have a certain attitude about that. If they come out of sort of a hero movie, they have an attitude about that. If they come out of a sort of a violent movie, or a wrestling movie, or a kung fu movie, then they come out a little bit more aggressive and what have you. Same if they come out of a comedy, they're going to be yucking it up and laughing and everything like that. Same, and this is like immediately after the show, or if they come out of a romantic story or a romantic comedy, then then typically obviously that's going to be more couples where the violent movies, kung fu movies, and whatnot might be couples or it might not be couples. So you can simply do this yourself, by taking a look around and noticing things. So as I'm sure you will. So there's no question that it lends itself, and our society is going further and further and further along that way. What used to be considered completely out of bounds is commonplace now on daytime TV. I might get into that a little bit more in a second, but I do want to mention that, as some of you probably have read, in the Civil War, when we were fighting, against each other, brother against brother, cousin against cousin, father against son, the sort of hit rate, what they call the hit rate, when the guns would be shot was, minimal. 1 in 10, 1 in 12, 2 in 10. Now, granted, the weapons weren't as sophisticated as they are now, but what the Army and the Army psychologists kind of figured was, it's kind of hard. As angry and as aggressive as people get, it's rather hard to shoot someone. It's just upsetting, right? Like it's not most people, not everyone. Most people are, even though trained, when it comes down to it, they don't want to do that. So as time went on into the 20th century, especially in the Vietnam War, they started training their soldiers differently, and they started dehumanizing the enemy. And one method they used was videos. Now, this is back in the early 60s, and well, actually through the 60s and 70s. So they weren't nearly as sophisticated as now, but they would have the soldiers practice, so they became desensitized to it, and they dehumanized the enemy, which is done in wars all the time. And the hit rate went up dramatically to 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 shots fired actually hit another person. Now, as a Christian, there's a problem with that, of course. For me, at least, I can't speak for anybody else. It's a whole deeper conversation than we're going to get into here. But the reason I bring that up is to make the point that video games and movies and things of that nature do have an impact on our thinking. There's really no one out there who's disputing that. The evidence is overwhelming that what we watch does influence our attitudes and our behaviors, and will make us act in the situations we're talking about, make us act more aggressively, more violently. So when you expand the horizon to video games, are obviously something that kids watch. It's ironic to me and interesting to me. Some of the video games are rated M for mature, as I understand it, and I just have to wonder which mature person is spending a lot of time watching those or playing those games. I'm sure that some people do that would take offense to this, and they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s for that matter. But just the term mature is rather ironic to me, and I don't mean to offend anyone, because it could well be that some of you do enjoy playing those games. Not my cup of tea anyway, so a little easier for me to sort of stand in judgment, if you will. I don't mean to stand in judgment, but there's a fair amount of research out there and anecdotal evidence that also points to the fact that even though those video games are rated M for mature, most are not watched by people 17 and older, 18 and older, whatever that case is. Most are watched by kids that don't make that rating, that it's ostensibly not produced for, designed for. So that's a huge problem, I think, our issue, at least in our society, and what we're going to do with it is, we'll see. We'll see about that. So following that along from the video games to, what you see on TV. I remember as a graduate student, one of my professors looked at this, and at that time I didn't think a whole lot about it, but she had us look at cartoons and what they call antiseptic violence. So kids see this, and their mind is not developed fully. They're still young kids, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. They don't really have their mind has not developed that they understand everything. So the antiseptic violence, where you'll see a Bugs Bunny or whatever have you with the new cartoons, hit somebody on the head with a sledgehammer, and you see the bird and the stars above. So for the kids, it's not that uncommon that they will try that. Maybe not a sledgehammer, but they don't comprehend that really is not okay, that those are not real people on the cartoons, and that doesn't really happen that way. And if you hit somebody hard, it's going to hurt and perhaps injure them very badly. Same thing goes with guns. We've had a number of people in the past 3 or 4 decades, kids shoot someone, not really fully realizing that may be a permanent solution to something, or they just simply don't realize it. We had a case here not far from where I'm at right now in Palm Beach, Florida, about 15 years ago in the news. A middle school student, last day of school, very kind of casual day, a fun day. He had a teacher that everyone liked. He liked him as well as one of his teachers. He misbehaved, a boy 13 years old. And the teacher said, okay, look, it's the last day of school. The rules are, you can do certain things which they had outlined for them to do. They could, go maybe to different classes without a pass or what have you. But he had somehow broken the rules. He had done, I forget what the infraction was. But, okay, not a big deal. I'm not angry, but, you can't do this. You must now leave, because that was the rules. If you did this, we can't control the students. So anyone who does this has to go home. You go home for the summer. That's it. We'll see you next year. Well, he did, and he sent the boy home. The boy went home, went far, far away, 3 or 4 miles, I guess it was, on the other side of Interstate 95, got a gun and rode his bicycle back to school and shot and actually killed that teacher, Barry Bruneau. And there was it was famous when it was nationwide news, the incident as well as the trial. And the argument was, his mind wasn't fully developed to understand the gravity of his actions. And while you may agree or disagree, there's probably equal number of people on both sides. I'm not here to resolve that, but I will stand by this, and you're going to have to sort of trust me as your humble professor. Both sides have an argument. I'm not. I go back and forth on it myself, but there is no question that there is scientific evidence that says he really could not have realized the gravity of his actions, and the other side says yes, he does. Maybe not. I will say this: he realized some of the gravity of his actions, right? Like, he knew he shouldn't have come back to school. I mean, he knew all those things, but just in terms of what sparked it, he was a good kid. He never was in trouble. He was well liked by the teachers and the staff and his fellow classmates. So a mystery in many ways. So again, when you look at the cartoons and what we call the antiseptic violence is a term that shows, okay, somebody gets hurt, is violent, but he doesn't really get hurt because he's a cartoon. He gets when I was a kid, they used to bang him on the head, and they have a big bump go real high, real fast. So kids don't realize that. And then you see even the verbal violence on television, the news. And this has been a change, certainly in my lifetime. I'm 57 years old. So through the 60s and the 70s, there was, 3 stations, maybe 4 stations if you count PBS or one of the VHS stations, and 3 or 4, newscasts on every one. There's a half an hour national news and a half hour local news. But now news is 24/7. And regardless of if you're on a political side or not on a political side, I think everyone agrees that, and this is one of the few things I do agree on, if you get the people on the sides there and not in the middle, that we are becoming more polarized. The people on the left are further on the left, the people on the right are further on the right, and there's was a time when there'd be some agreement, some disagreement, some agreement, some disagreement, and we kind of meet in the middle somewhere. Now, and partly because of the media perpetuating this idea that you're either all right or you're all wrong, people are kind of digging into that. Another example of how media can influence the way we think, feel, and act. There's no question in my mind, and I contend any social scientist worth his weight would be in that same camp, either in total agreement or something close to it. So we see that, and we see the yelling back and forth, and we see that the kids especially, they've never been given a good model of, in terms of TV. I shouldn't never. That's a absolute kind of idea there. I don't like to talk in absolutes, but just a lot of the time seeing people shouting each other down, people not listening. So that's another form of violence and aggression, verbal violence, not just physical. Which leads us to, and I won't keep you on here a whole long time. Another very disturbing trend in society, which is pornography, which is something that we are discussing this week. It has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. It has always been around to some extent through history. We can find books and writings and things such as that. And then when I was a kid, there were you could see, like, through certain parts of town, driving through, going somewhere, whatever, you see adult bookstore, adult toy store, these kind of things. But then along comes the internet, and it started people could have it right in their homes, and they could look it up on any number of sites, and some of them, I guess, don't cost anything. Some of them, then they get you to buy a membership, what have you, because obviously they got to get you to pay for it, otherwise it wouldn't be $1 billion industry. So I've worked with clients in a coaching situation, couples, where pornography has ruined their lives, in essence. It is in many ways like drugs. You start to crave it. It could be men or women. It's more men than women, but women can become addicted to it as well. And so another way it becomes like drugs is because you kind of crave it. And like drugs, the first time you take a drug, okay, well that's good, and you take it again and again, and all of a sudden that same pill or shot or whatever that you took, it's kind of like, maybe I'll up it a little bit. I need a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, until unfortunately we see, our country is we have too many people hooked on drugs that can't get off, living in the streets and everything. Pornography is much the same way. So it's got to be a little bit more perverted and more graphic and any number of things. People have told me it started out just kind of innocently enough, even couples watching together to put a little spark. But in the cases I've dealt with, again, a little bit more and a little bit more, till you cared more about the people on your computer screen than each other. And again, it costs money. It takes away from productivity. It does something to your mind. It really does. It rewires your mind that unless it's some extravagant orgy for, I hate to even say that, which is not love. So that does influence the way we're wired and the way we think, feel, and act. Along the same lines with aggression is, and there's numerous studies, as you know now, but from the reading and the survey of the material this week, that men, especially when they watch pornography, they become more aggressive and more violent towards women. They even to the point of condoning rape. No doesn't mean no. All of a sudden, when a woman says no, and I don't want to do that, they think that's just a come on, if you will, but it's not. The pornography shows, that just means no. So these are psychological issues, social psychological issues that society must come to grips with, and they must realize what it's doing. And I don't mean to push my morals or my values on anyone else out there. That's not how the country works. And pushing my values is not Christian, pushing our values. But I see it as a Christian person, the implications of aggression and violence and pornography, but also as a scientist, as a social scientist, to look at and evaluate how that really is detrimental to society. Even if this was a country of atheists, which thankfully it's not, you'd be pretty blind not to recognize how detrimental that is. So we're going to go with a Bible text that's I'll give you here in a minute. Let's see. Let me think. 1 John 1:1. Very easy. 1 John 1:1. Look that up, message me, and you'll get credit for being here. And other than that, I'll be looking for you in the course room.